Hello everybody, and thanks for joining me. Today I'm tying this nice little Midge merger pattern using a Paraloop technique for the hackle. My hook is a partridge size 12 clink harmer hook, although I'm going to modify it by bending it a little bit more up at the thorax. The thread today is UTC 70 in black, and to make the body, 2 strands of moose mane, one light and one dark, wrapped together to create a nice banded effect. To protect the body and help it sink through the water surface, a thin coat of clear varnish. For the backbone of the Paraloop, I'm going to be using half a strand of this white yarn, and to hackle, a nice whiting Hebert Minor saddle in grizzly. Of course you can change that up if you'd like, but for this pattern I think the black and white works nicely. Finally, the thorax is going to be made up of peacock herl. This is just the strong stuff, you don't have to bring out the fancy ones for this. So let's get started. I've cast on my thread and run it down most of the way around the bend of the hook. And here I'm going to tie in my 2 moose mane fibres, one light and one dark. I'm going to run my thread all the way back up the length of the body and then make a couple of extra passes, just laying down some thread wraps to build up a little bit of a taper moving up towards the thorax. When it comes to wrapping moose mane, be careful not to use too much tension. It's a fairly brittle material, and if you accidentally catch it on the hook point or pull too hard, it can snap right away. So just be careful. Make sure that you keep the fibres parallel and touching, and working forwards lay down touching turns. Now look at how the colours change as we move up the body of this fly. That light hair is brown at the tip, moving to almost pure white, and the dark one is jet black at the tip, moving to a very pale grey. And as we work forwards, as we use up those hairs, you can see those colours start to transition and change. It creates a lovely segmented effect, and looks very natural and adds quite a lot of visual interest to the fly. I've taken that up to the thorax, so I'm going to make a couple of extra loops, just taking it forwards so that if that happens and it slips, you don't lose too much. Secure it down with a few tight thread wraps, and it's so brittle you can actually just break it away. To protect it, we're going to do quite a nice thick coat of varnish, and I think that it's almost mandatory to do that for these sorts of flies. Otherwise, the first fish that bites it is going to snip through that moose mane and the whole body's going to unravel. I'm using varnish. You could also use a thin UV resin. Either way, just lay down a nice thin coat, let it dry, and we're ready to carry on with the body. Here I'm adding in my yarn. This is about half the thickness that comes off the spool. You don't have to use too much, just something to wrap the hackle around and draw forwards for this Paraloop. Made a few tight turns to secure. Going to trim away the excess and tie down the butt ends. Try and make sure that this is nicely centred and on top of the hook shank. That's just going to make it easier to wrap later. We can draw that upwards, make sure it's all nicely together, and the next material is going to be our hackle. Tying this in by the stem, working backwards, and making sure that it's pointing horizontal along the axis of that thorax, because we're going to be wrapping it around a vertical post. Again, this is one of very few times that I do use a gallows tool, but for this one it really does help unless you happen to have 3 arms. Putting gentle tension on that, pulling it up, and now we can start wrapping the hackle. I'm going to wrap my hackle clockwise around the post, working up and then back down, aiming to make the big bushy hackle about the same length in total as the distance between the post and the eye of the hook. That way, when it comes to folding it forwards at the end, it matches up nicely and sits right on top of the thorax. I get about 20 loops in here, far more than you could fit in on a fly of this size ordinarily. Gets a little bit awkward tying it off. I'm going to make 2 wraps around the base of the post, draw the fibres back, and a couple of locking wraps around the hook shank. Then we can release it from the gallows tool. This won't be going anywhere. The hackle almost locks itself into place because you cross wrap it up and cross wrap it down. So we can trim away the excess, draw back the fibres, and you'll see that that's going to be nicely sized to go over the thorax, just about to the eye of the hook. For the time being, we can park that out of the way, a couple more locking wraps to keep it at the back, and then it's time to think about the thorax. For this fly I'm going to use 3 strands of peacock herl, twisted together into a little dubbing rope just to make a nice bushy thorax, securing that down from back to front, and then taking the thread just behind the hook eye ready to tie off. For this first wrap I'm not twisting it, but as we go I'm just going to gradually introduce more and more twist, building up a nice fuzzy dubbing rope. I want to build up a little bit more bulk, so I'm going back on myself here, building up a nice little egg-shaped thorax. It's going to catch the light, it's got that iridescence from the hurl, and just really adds a nice effect underneath that hackle. And that's the beauty of using the Paraloop technique. Everything on the body and the hackle will sit subsurface because it's below the hackle. Creates a very nice emerging effect for insects, and it, as I'll show you later, creates a lovely meniscus as well. Now it's time to bring the loop forwards, so just drawing those fibres back, making a couple of loose wraps over the top with the thread, and pulling through on that yarn. Now, plenty of tension. Draw down those two loose wraps, make one underneath, one over the top, another one underneath, and that's well secured. Now, whip finish. Build up a little bit of a head underneath, cut away the thread, and then cut away the yarn. You can either trim off that yarn close, or leave a little stubby bit pointing forwards over the eye, just to give the suggestion of an emerging wing or similar. It is a scruffy emerger pattern after all. Here's a look at the finished fly. I'm going to show you it in the water in a second, so don't click away. You can see that all of that hackle, all like 20 turns of it, is sat right on top of the fly. So this floats beautifully, creates a really nice meniscus in the water, and that body dangles enticingly below. I do like doing paraloops, haven't really featured them on here before. They're an easy enough technique to do once you've got the hang of it. So it does help having a gallows tool though. You can see that body hanging below, just like an emerging midge or an emerging insect. Thanks for watching, hope you've enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you in the next video.